So the astrology of the week of 28 February 2022 through 6 March 2022 is really a week of maybe profound, disturbing truth, the power of the highest forms of truth that can terrify, coming in and strongly being, injected into the reality as a result of this very epic Pisces New Moon that happens here this week. And then combined with this Plutonic revelation that emerges when Mars and Venus conjoin Pluto in the late degrees of Capricorn. This is a very intense week of astrology. Let's get into the charts. Let's get into the week. My name is S.J. Anderson. Welcome to my channel here. I talk about astrology every week. I do a weekly astrology video, release it on Sunday, sometimes a little later. Today's gonna be a little later, just, this weekend has been wild, hasn't it? And I come this week, I really come with a solemn tone and a tone of almost as real as it gets in life. And I think this is part of what Jupiter in Pisces does. It's actually a great example of the significations of truth, wisdom that Jupiter embodies. Remember, it's a great planet. This is not a lighthearted, frivolous planet, Jupiter. It's an intensely powerful planet, one of the two great planets, Jupiter and Saturn. And so at a time right now in our world where it's so powerful, Jupiter will be in Pisces. Right now this week it is in its own domicile, its own Egyptian term and its own decan here in Pisces. The strongest part of Pisces that Jupiter will be, and also when you have a new moon happening in those same that same part of the sky, a new moon that will be also in the term and the face and in the domicile and these same power degrees of Pisces. This is kind of the time when I think we can say, what does Pisces mean? What does Jupiter mean? And given the world events, and that's why it's a solemn tone, because this is we're on the brink of it's the worst war in some ways, that I've witnessed. But in terms of the posturing with nuclear weapons by nuclear powers, this is the closest we've come in my lifetime to some kind of apocalyptic nuclear exchange. And I don't say that to be fearful. I'm just talking about the messages in the media and the symbols in the media. I just saw the day before I pressed record, I guess there has been a change in the nuclear levels with Russia, putting their nuclear weapons, I guess, on a higher alert. And that's terrifying. That's absolutely terrifying that the world is going to escalate this moment, and we're now on the brink of something like nuclear annihilation. But see, this is where it's both Plutonic, and so let me just come back here. I'm going to talk about the global events in this video. I'm going to try to address them and process them using the tool of astrology. And there's a little precursor conversation to have that, astrology is so this arises. There's some people right now on social media saying that, we should put our astrology aside, and that the astrology is somehow doesn't have a seat at the table or a place at the table right now in this moment because it's too serious or something like this. And so I just strongly disagree with that, and I want to just lay out a little bit of but not in a mean-spirited way. It's like people are going to think however they think, and I encourage you, even out there listening, if things get too intense, you can turn everything off. I don't think it's a question of the astrology, it's the news, it's all of it. It's a very, very intense time, and we have permission, we have full freedom to shut things down as needed. So but in terms of where I strongly disagree, the astrology is not a game. Astrology is not something that is just for fun, that we use just to tinker with, on that breezy afternoon sunshine. Astrology is real. It's as real as it gets. It is reality. It's not separate from reality. It's not optional, in my view. It's not an optional add-on to reality. Astrology is reality. The planets make up the materiality. The substrate of the materiality is formed by planetary energy. This is the ancient Hermetic philosophy that I ascribe to. And so to me, that's just not, it's just illogical that in our moment of great crisis, whatever that is going to be, whether it's personal or collective, astrology is going to ride shotgun. It's going to have a seat at the table for sure in terms of how I live and how I practice in my worldview, because it is the great processing tool. It is how one can understand what's happening in reality. It can alleviate pain and suffering. It can mollify the worst effects of the intensities of the moment. And it can actually help us engage reality in a more kind of beautifully rich way. And so my belief is that astrology needs to have a primary seat at the table, and but yet then it's how we engage, and it's not a problem with astrology, it's a problem with all discourse. How do you discursively engage a heavy, serious, weighted moment? Do you do it with honor and care and compassion and concern and kind of intelligence and skills? Using skills skillfully, as they say in Buddhism, and that applies across the board right now when we're dealing with such a serious moment. So I want to try to engage this stuff as skillful as I can be, as kind of compassionate as I can be, as honest I can be. But we have to engage it. There's no way around. I can't come here and make a weekly astrology video and pretend that the world's not on the brink, or at least that the discourse has risen to a level that's terrifying. I just won't do it. It would be dishonest of me to do that, because that's what's happening. So now let me come back. Having said that, this is why Jupiter, this moment where it's peak Jupiter, we can try to understand what is truth, what is Pisces, what are the storms of Pisces, these truth storms of Pisces, and we're here in it right now. I mean, I pressed record after watching some of this news, following some of this news earlier today. There's escalation, and so I guess what I want to say, the last thing I want to say here is, so truth hurts. This is the idea. Truth can be terrifying. You go to the Bible, and I'm not a practicing Christian. I grew up as a Christian. I'm certainly some other kind of spiritual practitioner. I have different worldviews, but I remember when I was young and I was in church environments, and people would talk about the terror of God. If there was this revelation of God, it can be terrifying because of how profoundly kind of insane it can be, maybe something like this. If you see God, you have to be prepared for that, because it can be kind of a terrifying thing. Also, the Leonard Cohen line, one of my favorite lyrics, that he says something about revealing the awful truth to kids, and I wish I had the line. It's you can't reveal the awful truth to. Let me just get it up. This line is too powerful, but it's from a song of his called "Closing Time," which is a great song. It's about a bar and closing time, but this is a line about how truth can sometimes be so intensely real and difficult to grasp and digest. And so you get this kind of confrontation with deep reality, and it's Plutonic as well. I mean, that's what Pluto does. It brings out truths that then may be under the surface that we have to face. That's why they say time to face truth, or face the music. So I think it's, you can't reveal to the ears of youth. Let me see. I'm going to get it up here and read it. I used to have this lyric memorized from Leonard Cohen. Let's see. Closing time, awful truth, and Cohen. Let's see if that brings this up. But it's an important point here that I want to address at the outset of the video, because it's geez, this is really hard. So closing time, I guess I'll just have to go to the Google search closing time lyrics and try to get it up that way. Search engines have gotten so bad, haven't they? I mean, you can't really, they give you what they want to give you. So I'm getting a lot of ads there. This is, let's see, closing time lyrics. There's that other song, Closing Time, by, I forgot what band it is, Semisonic, that always comes up at here. So here's the Leonard Cohen closing time lyrics. Sorry to do this in this video. I just want to get this lyric right, because I think it really does encapsulate the moment that we're going, that we're living through here. Now let me do a search in the page, find in page, awful. So here it is. I lift my glass to the awful truth, which you can't reveal to the ears of youth, except to say it isn't worth a dime. So there's this idea of like this profound truth that can be so awful. I like that word from Leonard Cohen. It can be so dark to see these truths, and war is dark. War is very, very, very dark and awful. That's an euphemism for war. It's horrific. You know, I've got family members, firsthand accounts of battlefields in my family, father and grandfather, and it's not something that is, you can't even talk about it. You would have to live it to even understand it. That's what they both told me. And so we're dealing with kind of the awful, one of the most awful truths of the human experience right now this week with this strong Jupiter. And so I just want to say, you know, that's that helps us understand a little bit about how Jupiter is activates. It activates these deep and profound truths that we're then forced to confront. And everybody else who's not on the battlefield, you, me, everybody, we have to kind of dig deep here with the idea of annihilation. This is another thing I wanted to say. I was going to talk about it later, but I'll talk about it here. What if the world is confronted with nuclear annihilation? I mean, what if that happened in a week? And God forbid, I'm not predicting that, let me be clear, but it's the idea of what does it mean to be human then, in a world where that is now in the conversation. That's entered the chat even a little bit. We're having to ask ourselves, I think, primary truths. What is life? Why am I here? What does it mean to be human? What is real? What is the human experience? Those questions become almost paramount when day to day, week to week, we're on the edge, maybe at least it's entered the chat of these kind of high level crises. And I think about the Cuban Missile Crisis, I'll go back to Phil Oakes and Bob Dylan. And that Cuban Missile Crisis, they were playing music in Greenwich Village, singing. And I think that is the kind of beautiful part of how we might be able to embrace this period, is creating, stepping into our creative powers, loving others, just being and living for that moment and the joy of that moment. Like he says in that song, lift the glass to the awful truth. So if you can do that, if you can find peace this week, as much as you can, a modicum of it, wherever you are in the world, this might be a way to kind of celebrate life in the face of the darkest parts of life. So, all right, that's an introduction here, and I know it's maybe gone a little long, but it's important because in our astrology, in my view, the worldview we bring into the charts and the processing is as important as the charts themselves. And so it's good, I think, to clarify viewpoints and worldviews a little bit here before we dive into these charts this week. I'm not going to say much else about an introduction. We'll talk about it all as we get into these charts. So let's move now. I want to move to this first part of the week. It's a big week with aspects, tons of stuff going on. I'm going to go kind of fast here. On Tuesday we get Wednesday we get the new moon. So this is 6:30 in Central Europe. We get the new moon in Pisces. Again, it's with Jupiter. It's a transit of the week, and it's it's one of the two charts I'm going to pick. So that will be the new moon. I'm not going to say much about it other than say it's conjoined Pisces right in the middle of the power degrees there in Pisces of Jupiter with Jupiter. So it's peak Jupiter in Pisces because it's a syzygy locking in the energy and stamping that energy. So then we have Sunday is when everything else happens. This week is like the midweek syzygy of the new moon. And then Sunday is when the big shifts happen. And what happens on Sunday? It all happens here within the same hour. Mars enters Aquarius. 7 minutes later, Venus enters Aquarius. This would be around 7:30 in Central Europe, AM. And then about 40 minutes later, less than an hour later, Mars and Venus conjoin in 0 Aquarius, this degree that's been so important for what we're living through. We had the 0 Aquarius, Jupiter and Saturn conjoined 0 Aquarius. In 2020, Mars and Saturn met in 0 Aquarius. And then later in 2020, Jupiter and Saturn met in 0 Aquarius. So this is another meeting of Venus-Mars, 0 Aquarius, the second of 2 conjunctions. And I'm going to talk about this chart because this is my 2 charts. This is the second chart I'm going to talk about this week. The thing I have here, let me just go back. So the Piscean storms on Wednesday, we're braving those storms, and there may be huge changes that are happening in the collective now. The mutability of Pisces is something we have to keep in mind as we get peak Pisces, peak Jupiter. All of the upheavals and changes with the global order, right? With the financial order. I mean, this is going to continue to deepen this week and into this year, actually. I was just talking to my friend Cam White, and we were noting, we were looking at the Russia chart, that Mars retrograde in Gemini at the end of this year goes over the Russia Sun in midheaven in the Russia day chart, the 12 June chart. This stuff could potentially be around for a long time this year. Mars in Gemini is a big, intense thing. If you look at the history of when Mars goes retrograde in Gemini, I'm not going to do that here, but there's geopolitical instability is a big theme of 2022, and it's likely to continue here. But these are huge collective upheavals now, and that we have Jupiter in Pisces with this climax of the Piscean storms. here really in February, March, and April, it doesn't surprise me that this will time some great shifts and changes in the whole of reality. Remember Pisces, what is it? It is that last sign, right? You start with Aries, and then as the first sign on the spring equinox, and then and this is the dance of the zodiac, but this final, people talk about it as the dissipative Piscean, where everything kind of becomes this great grand oneness of dissipation. And that's maybe where you get the Neptune ruler, being a ruler of Pisces. And then we kind of dissipate into and get reborn at 0 Aries. I think about Stanley Kubrick. I think about the final sequence of 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's very 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's like this Piscean dissipation, and then this rebirth as the star child. And I want to just mention here, Saturn, Neptune conjoin at 0 Aries in 2026. That is the rebirth, I think, of the collective star child rebirth. So hang on for that, and I'll say this, I'm going to be saying this a lot over the next couple of years. I kind of decided I want to focus on building optimistically for the second half of this decade. That's really where I want my whole thrust, just with my astrology, with my mentality and everything, because the astrology really does get powerfully fresh and new, and there's a whole feeling of collective rebirth that comes about 2025, 2026. Hang on through this really tumultuous period. Just hang on, because we're gonna, and what do you want to be and what do you want to build? Maybe that's another way to think about Jupiter and Pisces, is as visioning the mutability. We can envision and project sometimes years into the future. So what do I have here? So then the sun gets pure. So the sun will purify Jupiter. That's a whole nother part of this week, and I didn't mention that. That happens actually on Saturday, not Sunday, and that's Saturday at 3. Jupiter in the heart of the sun. This usually is, this kind of purification of truth, beauty, and justice. I'm looking for maybe some breakthroughs with peace, or ceasefires, or talks maybe can happen on Saturday. Excuse me. With the sun and Jupiter, the sun and Jupiter in the heart of the sun. And then, so I talked about Sunday in the morning. It's Mars, Venus joining, moving into Aries and joining into Aries. The thing about the rest of this week, up until Sunday, is that Mars and Venus are applying, they perfect a conjunction with Pluto, and then they move, and then they change signs. But all week, they're going to either be very closely applying to conjoin Pluto, or then they will be moving. They will be separating, but still close in that conjunction with Pluto and those late degrees of Capricorn. It's only until Sunday that we get this Plutonic surge that will be done, because Mars and Venus change signs. Now they're in new rooms and new houses, and it's a really, in the ancient system, the boundaries between signs is stark. So as soon as you cross a sign boundary, you actually change the whole flavor of a configuration. And I'm looking, now they're still all ruled by Saturn, but I'm looking for this to be big, in the sense that maybe this week it's shaping up to be maybe a low point. I'm just going to be frank. It looks like a low point. You put on the news, and even this month. And I'll remind everybody here as well, I tweeted this week, but the Barbeau Planetary Cyclic Index, I've made videos about it. I've made videos, just type into Google, when will the global crisis end? You can see everything I have to say about the Barbeau Index, or a lot of what I have to say. It bottoms in March, on the 25th of March. So we're now entering this period, and Mars and Venus, when they cross into Aquarius, now they're with Saturn. So as we're getting to these low points here, we get this Mars, Venus, Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. I'm going to talk about that chart, so let me save some of this, but that's happening as well this week. That's on Saturday. I think it'll be a big shift, and I'll talk about that a little later in the last chart. And then we have Mercury conjoining the South Bending on Sunday, 6:15. That is just, it means it's square the nodes, but it's the point called the South Bending. Just like the nodes are made up, they're not really something we can see, so is the South Bending. And I hope at some point, maybe I'll try to do this, we should name the South and North Bending, give them names. Maybe they, just like Rahu and Ketu, maybe they deserve their own names. And I think we should start considering their own identity with their own entity, as their own entities, where they kind of have their own story to tell. But it's the South Bending with Mercury this week. The thing about Mercury conjoining the South Bending is that this is a point where Saturn will conjoin the South Bending this year. Mars and Venus conjoin the South Bending later this spring. So a lot is coming with Aquarius and exporting the eclipsy feeling to the signs where the nodes are. the fixed sign Taurus, the fixed sign Scorpio, but now we have a pile up in that square hard aspect, relationship. So this is intense. This is going to be intense. And I think with Mercury here, maybe we can sort of preconceive or kind of work magically or forerun or just feel into our eclipse story as we have the Mercury, the planet of communication with the heavens, activating that. Okay, so I'm going to move here. Just you can see that this week is gigantic. And I guess I just feel like the Pluto, Mars, Venus, Pluto dominates the week, and then as well as Jupiter and Pisces, and they make a sextile, as we'll talk here. Let's move now quickly. I want to talk about the moon and the aspects with the moon. So the Aquarius moon, we're in that, not quite yet. It's coming today, soon. The moon is going to shift into Aquarius, but we start the week Monday with this Aquarius moon. The moon enters Pisces on Tuesday, late, 9:30. And so this Aquarius moon, what do I have here? Sorry, I usually don't stop. I usually can't stop. For some reason, I just got kind of a blank brain. I'll just read it. The Aquarius moon highlights the Saturn and Aquarius theme that dominates March. That's what it's a dark moon. We're building into the new moon. It's waning. I think this Aquarius moon is coming early in the week, when later in the week Aquarius gets even more activated with Mars and Venus joining. And so this is just part of the build of this week. One of the themes of, this week is the Aquarius Capricorn shift. And remember, all fall, all winter, we had pile-ups in Capricorn and Aquarius. 6 of the 7 traditional planets were in Capricorn and Aquarius. There was massive stelliums in Capricorn and Aquarius. And so we continue, and then this moment, this weekend, I said this in last week's video, the moon came into Capricorn and then into Aquarius to start this week, activating this heavy-duty Saturn energy. And we've seen what's happened in the world, and so I think we're going to continue with that heaviness early into this week. Then we get this ingress into Pisces Tuesday at 9, about 10 Central Europe. And we get the Pisces New Moon that I already talked about. I won't say much more of that here. And I'm about to talk about the chart in more detail. But it's maybe the most Piscean moment yet of 2022. We get even more Piscean moments when we have Jupiter and Neptune conjoining, Jupiter and Venus conjoining, Mars, Jupiter, Neptune, and Venus all co-present in Pisces in April. So it actually, I think, even increases potentially. It's not a syzygy, a new moon there in Pisces, but it's still heavy Pisces, but we're ramping up now. And this moon in Pisces, Tuesday night, 9:30 until Friday at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in Central Europe. So it's basically a lot of this week, Wednesday, Thursday, and then early Friday, has this kind of peak Pisces. I guess what I was going to say about this lunar cycle is that this part of the zodiac where the moon is the major part of the action in 2022. It's Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, and Aries. That's where Saturn and Jupiter will be in 2022. Not Jupiter, Saturn nor Jupiter will be in Capricorn, but we had the Mars, Venus, and in Capricorn. But Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, those are the major players this year. And that's what this moon this week, it comes and is reborn as a new moon in Pisces, and then starts waxing this week in these areas that define all of 2022. And so I would be thinking about this week as, it's an accelerant for our 2022 story, for sure. And last week, it started last week and now into this week. So with just looking at the moon, what planets is the moon hitting? So, okay, let me come back here. Where are we? The Aries moon is ruled by Mars and Capricorn for the last time. That's the other thing. It's only right at the end. I think it's the anaretic degree of this Aries moon, Mars, and so it's 4 March. It's 6 March at 8:59. So 9 a.m. when the moon enters Taurus. And remember, it was only those 2 hours right before the moon enters Taurus will all of the action happen, with Mars, Venus entering Aquarius. And so this Aries moon is largely ruled by a Mars in Capricorn. And then when the moon is in Taurus, it's ruled by Venus in Aquarius. And so one way to say this is that starting Friday at 2 a.m. in Central Europe, so Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, this is a heavy moment for the Venus-Mars conjunction, because the moon itself is ruled by either Venus or Mars. during that conjunction, if you're following there. And so that's going to bring us into the whole conversation we're about to have about Venus-Mars, but it's first with Pluto and then it's with Saturn. This Venus-Mars conjunction can't get a break, can it? First Pluto, then Saturn. And so it's a time for heavy seriousness, and we see it in the collective. We see it in the collective moment. You know, you don't even need me to say it. When I say time for seriousness, we know everything that implies in this collective moment. So let me come back now to the next page. Let's go check out the first chart I want to look at. And so let me just tell you a little bit. The transit of the week. Usually I don't pick a new moon as the transit of the week. I really prefer the moon out of the sun's beams. And that's just in the ancient system. You want the moon out from the sun's beams. You want it waxing or waning where it's visible. But this week, there wasn't a better moon, because if you go to the Aries moon, yes, it's ruled by Mars in Capricorn, but you're squaring that Mars, and the aspects that the moon makes, it's applying as soon as it enters Aries, it applies to Saturn, you know, and so it's ruled by and squared by Mars in Capricorn, and so then when the moon comes into Taurus, it's the same story. It will apply to Mars and Saturn, and it will square Mars and Saturn in Aquarius. So those two moons, they're just not they're not as interesting to me. And the Pisces moon is with Jupiter. It's sextile Venus, and you have and so where would you pick then if you were going to find the best energy or the best kind of moment to enjoy this moon? And it really is, if it's got to be under the sun's beams, you want it right there at that what we call being in the heart of the sun. Every new moon is the moon in the heart of the sun. And so there's like an hour or so where the moon is very interesting as it's getting purified and reborn and seeded with solar power and solar light. And so that's what I would say is the transit of the week. You know, I have here, this is the moment for desperation prayers. I mean, I was feeling this today. I'll just be totally honest. I was like, is this our Cuban Missile Crisis moment? I've been talking about it for a while now, because I've known that the Saturn-Jupiter in the Cuban Missile Crisis chart was Saturn in Aquarius and Jupiter in Pisces, like we have now. And so I've been writing about it on Twitter, talking about it on podcasts and things, saying that 2022 could have a Cuban Missile Crisis, our very own Cuban Missile Crisis. But it hit me today. This is it. I saw it when I saw this news about nuclear, I guess the status has been raised. And it made me like just terrified, and realized this powerlessness, I think, is the key word. Man, I'm powerless. I can't do anything about this. I cannot stop that. I cannot stop a nuclear exchange. I can't. I'm just a powerless little being, a little astrologer, trying to make my way, trying to show up for life. But it hit me, and it's like, that powerlessness is something we all have to confront. And this is what I was saying earlier. It's like the powerlessness of our individual souls. In one way, we are subject to these greater forces of history. We're subject to being incarnated. We're subject to fate. And it just hit me like I have a strong powerlessness right now over this situation. And so I want to just pray, you know, desperation prayers, that might be the wrong adjective, but just the kind of prayers of powerlessness and of submission, of like, oh shit, that's all I can do is like pray for release and relief. And I think the collective, that's what I was saying about like Bob Dylan and Phil Oakes playing the Cuban Missile Crisis. What do you do when there's complete powerlessness? You know, how do you spend those moments? You know, and so I'm gonna do my normal stuff. Try to tweet some. Try to release my video. You know, have some readings this week. Call my family, friends. Just do the normal stuff I do. Go say hi to the people I know at the coffee shops and restaurants that I go to. Just try to smile and love and be happy. You know, but there is this kind of power that Jupiter can also signify as religion, God. Pisces being that last sign, it is this kind of final truth of reality, might be a way to say it, that can come from the storms. This is what it brings to mind, actually. There's a scene in the movie Forrest Gump where Lieutenant Dan, he had his legs cut off in war, so if we're gonna, Vietnam, and then he comes back and he's so angry. And I mean, why wouldn't he be? His body was just destroyed, and they have a shrimp boat and they're out on these storms doing their shrimp business. And Lieutenant Dan had turned to alcoholism and was so angry and full of rage at God and at his condition and at his legs and everything. And he's like yelling and screaming at God. and just it's like the confrontation with the powerful forces of truth, and the awful truth of life and the suffering, and he's yelling and screaming in this great storm scene. And that's, to me, this moment this week with this new moon. It's kind of like our, the gods can take our rage. Sometimes that's the best form of prayer, is just like getting and yelling and just being honest with these higher forces. And so this is kind of that Lieutenant Dan moment, I feel like, this syzygy, this new moon. Look at it here. I have Jupiter is so powerful, the Lord is my shepherd, the Psalm 23, I shall not want. He maketh me lie down in green pastures. I used to have it memorized when I was young, and I used to use that prayer when I was scared a lot. Some people say the Psalms are like magical invocations. It's a book of magic, actually, that's encoded, Hebrew magic, ancient Hebrew magic, and it's been encoded into the Bible, and people do use it for magical purposes. But it's the idea of this kind of surrender to this divine force, because there's a sense of collective powerlessness now. Only a few people have their hands on the button, right? And it's intense, it's just intense. Wow. So I just want to look at the chart here a little bit. The term and the face and the ruler is Jupiter, for both the sun, the moon, and Jupiter, like I've been saying. The other thing I really like about this new moon is that it's making the sextile to the two triplicity rulers. So one way to look at any sign in your chart, pick the sign in your chart, and it would be a house if you're using whole sign houses, so the sign/house, or the house cusp if you're using quadrant houses. And each sign has a bunch of rulers. The domicile ruler, some of them then have an exaltation ruler, 7 of them. And then they have triplicity rulers, 2 main triplicity rulers, one for the day and one for the night. And so you can, in any chart, say, well, what about Pisces in my chart? So in this chart where I am in Europe, it's the 7th house. So let's understand the 7th house in Pisces. Well, we know the ruler Jupiter's there, so it gives it great power for 7th house significations and topics with Jupiter themes, because Jupiter is in the 7th house, ruling the 7th house. Okay, cool. So we got that. Truth, beauty, justice, and relationship, if this were their natal chart. And then you have, well, what is the other ruler? The exaltation ruler is Venus. Okay, the triplicity rulers, by night is Mars and by day is Venus. So we need to look at Venus and Mars in this chart to also understand another level of how the astrology is operative. And look where Venus and Mars are. They're both making that sextile from the night sex sign, Capricorn. So there's this exchange with all of its rulers here in this new moon moment are making this exchange. But that's the other thing to say about the new moon. Those other 2 rulers are seeing the new moon by aspect, but they're with Pluto. Very, very close. Mars is in the same degree as Pluto, and Venus is in the degree just following. And so it's here Wednesday when the Mars-Venus-Pluto conjunction really begins to intensify. And it will be Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and it's only Sunday, remember, when they change signs. But this is locked in the syzygy. And that's why I think, on the one hand, this is a beautiful Jupiter-ruled syzygy, but it is a very intensely profound syzygy with the Plutonic. And Pluto just adds in the layers of intensification. That's also just one way to think about it. And everything I said about Lieutenant Dan and the storms and the prayers of desperation, that's deeply Plutonic. It's like everything, and so is the edge of a potential nuclear annihilation. And I say that not as a predictive, let me be clear, I'm not predicting nuclear annihilation. How could you? Who would ever predict that? I want to envision peace. What I'm acknowledging is that it's in the discourse. It's emergent in the collective discourse. And so I'm trying to process that has now emerged in the collective discourse in a way that it's never been in my life. Maybe in the early 80s, I was very young, there were some really, some close exchanges, but, and that's to help me process. I see Pluto with Mars and Venus, Mars and Venus being 2 planets of war, Pluto being the deep foundational pull of the nuclear. Even that Pluto's discovery happens around the time of the nuclear advancements of the early part of the 20th century. And so this component, the 2 triplicity rulers and the exaltation ruler being on Pluto, it really provides deeper context of understanding for, I think, everything that's happening as I do this video, but as this week we get into maybe what might be one of the more intense weeks of our lives, frankly. in terms of collective news and economic and geopolitical. This doesn't surprise me that these aspects are here and they show up here. And so it's a tool for processing, because I can now process this week a little bit more for me personally, knowing, wow, this is Mars, Venus, right on Pluto as we have this new moon, and then knowing Sunday they shift. And I think we can, in some sense, look forward to some kind of shift, hopefully, Sunday, for the better, let's hope, out of this very Plutonic moment. So, okay, because after Sunday, Venus is now separating from Mars. And up until this Sunday, Mars and Venus Mars caught Venus, and then Venus will now catch Mars. So we're in this period, I think it was 10 days, where Venus and Mars were in this strange kind of combination as they are crossing over Pluto. That is over, and that's been a big part of the configurations of this year. So that might be a reason to be optimism on a local time frame. Of course, then we have to get through this Aquarian March and April with Mars and Venus. And Venus will be enclosed between Mars and Saturn. So that's, leads me to believe that maybe that's a different phase that we get. But once we get through that March and then into April, I'm just hoping that this particular local crisis, the war now in Ukraine, I'm hoping that can time its ending. And I tweeted about that this week, that April, when things get out of Aquarius and leave Saturn, that maybe the war, there'll be some kind of ceasefire, a local agreement where there's not this kind of death and destruction that's happening. So, okay, let me move now to the next chart I want to look at, which is the Venus and Mars conjunction. I've talked about it already a lot in this video, but let's just take a look at the configurations here a little bit. So the one thing I want to point out is Venus and Mars both had dignity in Capricorn. If you go back to this chart, the new moon, you can see here that Mars was in its exaltation in Capricorn, obviously, but in late Capricorn, Mars was in its Egyptian term. And Mars also is a supporting triplicity ruler of earth signs. So, it's not a major ruler, but it does have a little bit more support in earth signs than it would, let's say, in an air sign. And so that is going to be gone. Mars now comes into the air sign, and that's a little bit concerning and somewhat, because you have the air and fire. Air can make fire stronger. Air is often warm, especially during the daytime, and it's sunny, and this kind of warm air kind of fueling the fires of Mars. And so this is one, I'm just right now on this second chart. Let me come back and just my logic flow. Excuse me. I'm trying to talk about this change between Capricorn and Aquarius with Venus and Mars. And on the one hand, they both lose this dignity. Mars now is in a desect air sign, as opposed to being that cooler fire sign that can cool Mars down. And Venus loses the triplicity rulership in Capricorn and now is in Aquarius. And so that might be, just as a point of note, setting aside the global situation, just know that your relationships, whatever's been happening with that Venus retrograde, it'll now be over. And now with Mars and Venus now separating from Mars, this feels like a time to get more actively kind of moved away from the conditions of the last 4 months. Whatever those changes brought you in your relationships, maybe you have a new partner, maybe you're dating someone new, maybe you have new agreements with your partner, maybe you have no partner, but you're just happy about that. You made it through Venus retrograde without getting someone taking you into a relationship, and you can still retain the freedom, the martial freedom, and enjoy kind of the Aquarian side of this freedom, So whatever happened, just know that now there's a lot of movement, support for movement ahead relationally, and implementing those changes. That's what Aquarius can be. It's the daytime implementation, where now the review phase may be over, and now it's time to put it into practice. So that's, and it's relationship, because it's Mars and Venus. And so in that sense, it's kind of nice that while they don't have the essential dignity they had in Capricorn, there is the configuration dignity, we may say, where we're kind of moving beyond this climactic moment of a Venus retrograde with Mars. So, and then they're co-present with Saturn. That's the one thing I wanted to shift out of. Whereas Pluto is things that aren't apparent, made apparent, and they're long-standing things. They're things that are deep and profound. But Saturn is, in Aquarius in particular, is more of the apparent structures. And so again, I think that it's a direct engagement with the limits that are apparent in our lives now with Venus and Mars. And so, I would just encourage, I don't know, I was going to say here, encouraging, direct engagement with the reality here, with the new boundaries and new structures that you've installed. Maybe that's the best way to phrase that. And just note here, Venus will now, once it catches up to Mars, it's going to be in between Saturn and Mars for a long time. And this could get dicey for relations as well. So I know a little bit of a contradiction there. And I think this is important to keep in mind. While Venus will be separating from Mars, it has to apply to Saturn. And Mars is still pretty close. And so I guess we're not quite out of the woods. Venus will leave Aquarius on 5th April. So we have about a month where maybe we're still trying to get out and get Venus clear and free. And then it'll be exalted in Pisces. So, okay, and I don't know what more I want to say about this. I mean, I'm just thinking about this timing here. You can look in this chart, you've got 4 planets in Aquarius. This is a stellium in Aquarius, a 4-planet stellium. Mercury will head out next week and will head into Pisces. But you'll have this 3-planet stellium. And so we're again asking and engaging with Aquarius. Structures, limitations, boundaries, coldness, new ideas, new installations, the kind of inventive side of how we can control things, and how we can engage reality in structured ways that are visionary for the long term. It's very intellectual and very kind of practical and intellectual simultaneously, and serious, and so thinking about those themes in your life and how, themes related to your action, which is Mars, your relations and your beauty and pleasure, which is Venus, and your kind of larger power and kind of the larger commitments in your life, how all of those can now filter through these sort of intellectual visions for large-scale change. So, okay, I'm not going to delineate that much more. That's the second chart I wanted to look at. And, it's worth noting that, everything here, the other thing I just want to, I guess I can point out here, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of the 7 traditionals now are in Aquarius and Pisces, and then the moon will come through Aquarius and Pisces. And so this battle between the 2 great planets, Saturn and Pisces powerful, Saturn and Aquarius powerful, Jupiter and Pisces powerful. These 2 great planets are kind of in a competition. They're averse to each other, and they're both very strong. And I think this fits with the Cuban Missile Crisis narrative of like 2 great powers competing, and who's going to win. This might be part of astrologically why we're experiencing what we're experiencing, but it's over. As things start coming into Aries. The sun is the first thing that comes into Aries, out of the sun, out of everything. That sun, that Aries ingress chart, that's going to be the 20th of March, so we're about 20 days out from that. And that's when we start getting, we start coming out of the Pisces Aquarius intensity, and then now we're going to get into Aries. So let me see here. Let me just get the exact date. I want to see if Mercury or the sun. I believe it is the sun, but let me just double check. Will it be Mercury or will it be the sun? That leaves Pisces first. And so here we are. You can see my solar fire. Let me move this forward. Yeah, it's the sun. Mercury's way behind. Probably about, a week behind. So 20 March, the sun enters Aries, and you can see here, we'll only have 5 of the 7 traditional planets in Aquarius, Pisces, and then the moon will come through. So, okay, I guess let's pull a tarot card. Let's shift out of this now and pull a tarot card and see what kind of added symbols we can bring to this moment here. And let me see here, let me make sure I've got my Zoom shared properly for the video. Okay. All right, let's get the card. First, it is the only card. I'm only doing one card. This will be interesting. Let's see what this is. I always like to add cards. It's a sense of randomness. It's a sense of I don't know what the card will point to. And that's what divination is. That's what sortilege is. We open up to an unknown and let this randomness point us back into something. It's kind of beautiful in that way, whereas astrology is a little bit more tethered to a map that is dependent on our observations. So, okay, this is going to be it's an Earth sign. Okay, the 3 of Diamonds, synthesis, Mars and Capricorn. Wow. And this is the middle decan of Capricorn, but still it's the symbol of Mars and Capricorn. Where Mars is now, where Venus is now in Capricorn, and where Pluto is, not in this decan, but they're in Capricorn itself. I wonder here, all I will say about this, I think this may be pointing us to just thinking about Mars and Capricorn. How has it been the last 6 weeks? What have you been able to do? Have you been working with projects? Have you been building? Have you been kind of using this power of Mars, this exalted Mars, to get in and do things? I know I have. It's been great. It's been, chaotic at times. Mars and Sag was way more chaotic for me and way more out of control, the mutable fire Mars. But then that grounded Earth Mars, there has been actually, now that I think about it, a lot of progress for me, a lot of slow, steady, and a lot of building and working and focus. And so I'm just going to acknowledge that ends this week, and we shift out of it where Mars maybe doesn't have as much grounding, in the airy, the air of Aquarius. So maybe you can think about this week as getting some work done, getting some completions for what you've had in play and what you want to move forward with. I love that. So I'm just going to leave it there as that simple, as simply as that. We could, of course, go into Pluto and Venus, but we've done so much of that in this video. So I'm just going to think about, in spite of what's going on in the world, maybe there's a way to get into some building and construction as a coping mechanism, as a processing tool, like Dylan playing in Greenwich Village or Phil Oakes. Just do your work, in spite of the world ending, do your work. And as a noble approach to, work is how we express our humanity. It's an expression of our very humanity, the kind of nobility and the real virtue of industry and of the creative powers of being a human. We create like God, right? Like the gods. We have the power to generate and create. And this Mars and Capricorn is like the tangible construction of physical things that are part of that godlike power that we have. So, all right, I'll end it there. Thank you. This was the weekly astrology. This is the weekly tarot. I just stay centered spiritually as best as you can this week. My heart goes out to you and to the whole world. And, I love you, and I want to have love for you, for myself, for everybody during this week that is very much a very intense week for the collective. So take care of yourself out there.